Hello, my name is Feng. Welcome to Concept Design 2. In this DVD, we're going to talk about the basics of environment sketching. But first, I'm going to show you how to use thumbnails to put your ideas on paper, and then we're going to develop those ideas into a finished sketch. I'll be doing two different demos on this DVD, but both of them will be covering the subjects of sketching, composition, and lighting. I'm also going to go over the materials I use and some fundamentals about perspective. So let's get started. Okay, let's talk a little bit about thumbnails, right? We need to do thumbnails to get our ideas on paper. And thumbnails are literally what they are, very small drawings. So here's an 8.5 by 11. I'm going to zoom in, pretty small here, and draw our little environment thumbnails. The first thing I'm going to do is just box out what we're going to draw. So let's say that is going to be aspect ratio of our little environment. The first thing I'm going to put in a horizon line. Let's put one that's high this time. Right, here's our horizon line. Remember, these are loose. These are thumbnails. They're for yourself. You don't have to worry if they're super tight or perfect. All right, they're just to get your ideas on paper. So I'm going to put a horizon line. I'm going to put in a vanishing point and just start really exploring some shapes I could put in here. So for this one, maybe, something like this, and real quick, just to find your design, find your composition, right? Because you're doing both at the same time. Not only are you designing, you also have to worry a little bit about your composition. So with something like this is already good enough to tell a story, right? Could do another one. I'm gonna switch to a thicker pen here so you guys could really see what's going on here. Okay, for this one, let's switch to horizon lines. Put it on the ground this time. Let's put one right here, right? Here's our vanishing point. Draw this out. All right. This time maybe like so. Right, just getting ideas down. If you have ideas for some, maybe this is some kind of factory with pipes, things going in and out. Here's some people walking around. Right, they just serve as thumbnail purposes. You can even put some value in. And what I like to do is oftentimes just draw a little thumbnail, and the ones I like, for example, I just only did these two. The one I like, I usually like to just put a little bit of heavy border around it to remind myself that this is one of the ones I like. So by the time you're done, you have a page full of these little things. You know which one you're gonna use. So let's do one more. Right. Here's our aspect ratio. Let's put our horizon line in. Right. It's our vanishing point. Let's draw a couple of helper perspective lines. And these are 1-point perspective drawings here. Right. Let's put some buildings in. Yeah. Maybe there's a walkway. Some people on it. Storefront of some kind, right? Maybe these are buildings. You're in between some buildings, and here's a walkway. Some other walkways. City in the background. Something like that could work. These could be people walking around. Right. Got a street here. So this one looks pretty good. We got some walkways. Composition looks nice. We got foreground limit, middle ground, background. So this could be a petition we use. Could do one more here. All right, let's play around with some different kind of thumbnailing. Let's change the horizon line. Let's make this one very dynamic. Let's put on an edge here. Put our vanishing point there. Because remember, you can always play around with the horizon line if you want a different kind of shot. So, but once you change your horizon line, you gotta make sure these are also following. So your verticals are at an angle, right? 90-degree angle to your horizon line. So they're also tilted. So if I was gonna draw stuff in here, okay, big shapes of some kind. Just like that. So we got these walls. Maybe some shapes going across. There's another shape here. Got some guys walking around. And this will make a nice composition. It's a different kind of shot. So that talks a little bit about thumbnails. You could do quite a bit of these. They're quite small, they're fast. Right? Just go ahead and spend a few minutes, or even if you want, spend a couple hours on this and really find a shot you like. And when you want to draw your final drawing, just use these thumbnails and carry them over. So let's just do one more 2-point perspective. Some building. These could be crosswalks as well. Zoom in to show you what's going on here. Another building, some crosswalks, guys walking around for scale. These are windows. Right. And all using the basic rules of perspective, just real quick. Maybe it's nighttime, so the sky is dark. Yeah. Foreground element. More guys walking around. Box that in as one of the potential we could use. And that's how I do my thumbnails, right? Nice and quick and fun composition. So this is the kind of stuff we do. And so next step is now just to pick ones you like. Perhaps this one looks nice. I like the one in this one. And use it for our final drawing. So that's it for the thumbnails for this part. Alright. Okay. Welcome to the environment and set design tutorial. In this demo, we're going to show you how to get started to draw a set design or environment from our little thumbnail, right? Now, the first thing I showed you here is I'm drawing an 8.5 by 11 paper. However, the size that we're actually going to be drawing in is this little rectangular shape here. It's about 8 inches across, right? And the material is going to use, for now, is a ruler and a 10% cool gray marker. The ratio I'm drawing here, right, this long format, is a widescreen similar to a film. It's a lot easier to plan out compositions and mood lighting with this long format to match what we're going to do for a film. Again, you could change this proportion around to a square or whatever you need. But for this demo, we're going to use a long format like this one here. And we're actually going to blow this drawing up later once we finish the line art. But that comes in a little bit later in this tutorial. So for now, let's get started. First thing we're going to do is we're going to lay in a horizon line here. All right, very important environment to put in a horizon line. And just put that in. And we've got to make sure the horizon line is very straight. That line, right, you want it as straight as possible. And that's why I'm using a ruler for this, right? I'm going to keep it nice and straight. I could do it by hand, but it could be off a little bit. And by this early stage, I want to make sure everything's right. Now I put in my vanishing point. This is going to be a 1-point perspective drawing. Vanishing point is at dot. And these lines I'm drawing right now are actually just some random lines I'm going to put in to help me guide the perspective for later. Right? I'm just going to throw some random lines in because they're all going to converge to the 1 point. So all these lines like they go to the dot, it's going to be correct in perspective. So later when I start drawing my designs, I have a bunch of guidelines to help me get relatively everything correct, right? Instead of doing it by eyeball. Right? And because the drawing is so small, I have a lot of control over the perspective. Right? The bigger you get with the drawing, the harder it is to see your perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I draw a little bit smaller, work a little bit smaller on the page. And now I'm dropping some verticals in as well. These also serve as guidelines, right, for my drawing. All right, so we got our guidelines in there. And now let's put some horizon lines, right? Because this is a 1-point perspective, everything that's going across the page like that is parallel to a horizon line. So we just drop some lines super parallel using a ruler. So after all these guidelines in there, we could start actually drawing our design. Right? So just mark that horizon line because I did a bunch of horizon lines across the page. I just want to make sure I don't get confused and use another line as my horizon line, right? So our vanishing point is pretty clear. That's the dot. And now let's get started with the design. And refer to our thumbnail for what we're going to do here. Just going to start laying some major lines. Drawing a city scene, bunch of buildings, and you're kind of in between two giant buildings, looking down some sort of a street with the distant buildings really far from where you're standing. And up close, you're going to see some stores, some people walking around, and that's what we're trying to capture in this drawing here. Again, we're using a 10% gray marker. The reason why we use that is because it's very light. If we were to photocopy this drawing, which we'll actually do a little later, none of the marker is going to show up. It's just too light for a copy machine to pick up. So essentially, we're drawing with a pen that you could see, but you could replicate and it would just disappear. So almost like drawing with an invisible ink or something like that, which is a great way to guide your drawing in the beginning stages. Because you can make mistakes, you can do whatever you want. Nothing really shows up, especially if you plan to use the photocopy machine, as in this case we will. Okay, here we go. We laid in some of the major shapes for one of the buildings, right? I'm just laying in some couple more verticals. Okay, drawing details in here and there. Now I'm not gonna worry too much about fine details, right? I'm gonna kind of let the marker almost do that for me. Another great advantage of using the marker is the thickness of this tip. You can actually just indicate certain areas, and it gives you a lot of play as far as what details gonna go into them, right? So like right there, I beefed up the marker a little bit, made it a little darker, and it just gives me an illusion that something's going on in there, even though I haven't really physically drawn anything there. Now see how the guidelines are helping me right now? I drew out those guidelines earlier, right, which are pretty light right now. I could barely see them, but they're just thin enough for me to pick up, so I could draw my details in. Okay, I'm referring to my thumbnail a little bit to see where I want to put this detail. Right, got some support beams holding up this giant building, and here comes a little bug, little ladybug. Come on, off the page. Yup, it's still there. Well, maybe we'll leave it. Oh, now it's gonna get in the way of my drawing. So let's see. Let's get. Come on, move. Let's get a pen here. All right, fly away. Cool little guy to share the drawing with. And there he goes. All right, he flew back to the table, but it's okay. It's off my drawing now. All right, let's continue. That was a little fun little assignment. All right. Fun stuff. Alright, let's continue drawing the support beams. Lay this one in closer to camera. Now the scene we're doing, we want the scale to feel pretty massive. We want to feel like you're really small in this scene. The city is gigantic, these buildings are huge. And one way to show scale is repeating shapes. So what I'm doing here is, see that cross beam, the under beam I just did in the distance, and one that's close. Alright, they're similar shapes. However, later on, I'm going to start indicating some figures in this drawing, and they're going to be closer to camera. And even close range to camera, they're going to be pretty small next to that beam. So that beam goes into perspective. You're going to realize that's actually huge, right? And the further it goes back, you're going to have a good sense of what the scale is by judging how big people are relative to it. Right? So a great way to show scale is by repeating shapes, repeating big shapes. And since it's a one-point perspective, it's not too tricky to measure your things out into perspective. Now I'm putting a lot of details. It's not tiny details, but at least support structures on this building here because it is closer to camera. So later when we ink this, these needs to be pretty dominant on the page and make sure I see it. Again, making sure everything is going into perspective. At this early stage, even though you're drawing pretty quickly with this marker, you want to make sure it's very accurate, that your lines are really going to perspective. Because the more accurate you do at this point, the easier it is once you start inking your drawing. I'm laying some values right there, not necessarily lighting, but just so I could break some shapes up. You see how the marker gets a little thicker, you can actually see the marker quite clearly there. I'm using that just to break forms from one plane to another. So that's a walkway and there's a drop. Let's put a little bit of dark to remind myself that there is a drop there. Because once this marker dries, which takes about 2-3 minutes, a lot of the lines gets pretty light. Remember the initial lines I put in there as guidelines? You can barely see them now because the marker has dried a little bit. So by making it slightly darker, even if it dries, I can still see it. Now I'm going to go in and start detailing out the interior of this area, or the area underneath this overhang here. I'm going to repeat another one of those beams over. Right? So this really helps with scale. You can already kind of get a sense of how big this is just by repeating this giant structure. Then you see it far in the distance. So now there's a bunch of stores down here. I'm going to indicate some signs, some doors, and just little agreeable details to help this all come together here. again, always refer to your vanishing point, right? You don't want any of this stuff to go out of perspective. As soon as one of these major lines go out of perspective, the drawing's going to look kind of tweaked or bent. You want to make sure, especially when you're doing buildings and things like this, with a lot of architecture involved, you want to make sure your perspective is pretty dead on. A little bit here on and off is okay, but as long as your major lines are following, it should be okay. And also, since we're drawing this drawing quite small, when we blow it up, any mistakes, it's going to show up, especially if your perspective line is really bent. So because it's working small, you have a lot more control over these lines being straight. Use a ruler to actually hit them. But for now, we're going to rough in with marker. And as soon as we start inking, we'll actually hit some of these major lines with a ruler to make sure they're actually correct. So for now, we're using the advantage of the marker again. See those details I just put in where I just randomly put some dark areas? Right? Yeah, I don't know what those are, but the marker is going to help me determine some details, right? I know there's going to be stuff going on there, doors, signs, people walking around. But instead of me using the marker to draw all that, I'm just going to let the bleeding, the little bit of overwashed areas with the marker to help create some of those negative space. Right? Just by leaning the marker to one side, it creates a thick blotch. And you could read that as anything you want. A doorway or a sign or just negative space. Right? Now I'm going to lay in some overhangs, some walkways that's connecting these two buildings together. Again, repeating shape. We have one right there, right? One of the walkways, and just drew another one in the distance. And now I'm going to pull one right into camera. Right? That's all actually overhanging straight across above you. There you go. Right? Repeating more shapes. It's very important to get the scale to feel correct here. So even without putting any people in it, I want to get a sense of that everything is nice and big. Okay, just feeling around, grabbing some more details here and there. Now things in the background, not to worry about too much. When you do environment like this, you want all your details to be up close to the camera because that's where the focus point is. Everything in the background, we're going to fade away later. Once we ink and marker, those things are going to fade away nicely into the background. We don't want to put too much attention to them, otherwise it's going to compete with what you have in the foreground. Okay. But keep in mind that when you're drawing a drawing like this, you're working on a 2D surface. This is a flat piece of paper. So you have to do everything you can to create an illusion that this is a 3D space, even though you're creating on a 2D surface. So you do anything you can to help create that. So we're repeating shapes, we're changing the focus, right? Details up close, less detail further away. All that adds to the feeling of dimension. Okay, so I'm going to go in and just beef up a couple more lines. Putting a marker here and there to indicate something's going on. So you zoom in, see it's quite loose. But even though it's loose, the major lines are still correct in respect to the perspective. Right. And so you can already kind of see the environment taking place, even at this early stage. Right. You can see a big building with some beams and some crosswalks that goes across it in a central street area. Going here adds some more detail, right? It's so close to camera, there's got to be some details you can see that's close to you. Okay. Seems like it needs something right there, so let's repeat some details over. And that could be a guy right there I just put down. Maybe I'll use that as a scale for later. Put another guy there, another guy over here. Right, that's going to serve as our scale. Little guys walking around the street. Little details here and there. Almost done with the marker stage. Just last touches and we could go into inking because this is enough information for us to start inking. Right. We don't need any more, otherwise the whole paper is going to be covered in marker. And it's already a small scale drawing, right? It's pretty small on the page. Okay, a few more markers and we're ready to ink this thing in. Just going to put a last touch of detail here. Right, because it's so close to camera. I'm gonna put in a little bit more. Maybe it's a sign or some kind of detail that you can see. And I think this guy is ready to be inked in. A few more. Okay. Let's pan out so you can see what we got with the marker. Right. So now let's bring in our inking. Right. First thing to make sure is our horizon line is perfectly straight across the page. And to be really sure of that, I'm just actually just going to draw it right in. You know, I'm not going to care if it crosses over to my other drawing. I'm just going to lightly put a line in using a permanent ink pen here. Now the pen I use is pretty fine as far as the point goes. It's a 03. So the line I draw is very crisp and very thin. So I'm able to draw these drawings quite small, and they work when you blow it up. So again, I'm drawing in a couple of helper lines. And instead of drawing these more randomly, I'm actually kind of seeing where they're going to go on the drawing, right? Some of these drawings have these major lines. And I'm using this line, I put it right into my drawing. So this building, for example, has this big edge right here, right? I'm going to put that right in. Put that right in. Right. So this time it's not as random. Even though I'm not super precise with it, but I'm trying to match these buildings as best as I can. Okay, put all that stuff in there. So these guidelines will help me once I start inking to make sure I'm doing following the perspective and doing it correctly. Let's drop some verticals. Now normally verticals for a drawing like this, I keep it extremely perpendicular to the page. I'll use a ruler. But I'm giving it a slight 3-point. You can see the line converging on the edges there. So I'm giving it just a very little bit of 3-point perspective in this to really help with the sense of scale. So I'm going here again, some of the horizon line. Some lines that are parallel to the horizon line. And now I'm actually going to help just go ahead and start drawing this guy out. Right, so anything that's parallel to the horizon line, you can just use a ruler to do those a lot faster and more accurate. Especially at this early stage of inking, I want to make sure my major lines are precise. Now notice your vanishing point, the little dot in the middle, is getting pretty dark. We don't have to worry about that too much. We can always get rid of it later. For now, we need that on the page so we could get all the line work correct. Right, so here we go, that's all the lines, and you're probably ready to start just detailing this thing up. So let's go ahead, using our helper lines, and just start drawing the details out. All that stuff here, and vanishing point, buildings in the background. Right, you can start anywhere you want. So you could probably start right over here. Right. Now the way I draw is, I put a lot of little dots. You see me ghosting, right? Dots, dots, ghost. And that's where I connect my lines. So the dots, what it is a measurement in space. Instead of me drawing a physical line across, I ghost using my hand the distance between a shape. And what I do is I put down those two dots, see that? And then I ghost in between those dots, and when I feel confident that they're going to connect, I just drop the pen and create a line. Very similar to the children's books that you buy, where there's a bunch of dots on a page and just connect 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and by the time you're done, you have a drawing. So similar to what I do here, instead of got a lot more dots. Right? But the idea behind it is the same, is using these little dots to measure our distance. Another thing to notice, see I'm doing a lot of this freehand now instead of using a ruler. To do these straight lines, instead of using your wrist to draw these lines, I'm actually using my elbow as a pivoting point. So I put two dots down and I ghost in the line, and using my elbow I swing across and connect these straight lines. So try to show a better example that once the camera zoomed out a little bit, you see that my wrist is not bending, but rather my entire arm is moving to get that straight line. Right? You kind of see it there. My hand doesn't move. Right? The whole thing is moving. So I'm going there now, it's detailing this stuff out. Right, we're doing a pretty quick environment sketch here, so we don't have to be super tight with the line work. But I'm just going to try to be precise as I can here, even though a lot of this is drawn freehanded. Right, like that line right there. It's all freehanded. See the ghosting, where I draw across, get confident, and then drop the pen to create a straight line. So ghost, straight line, ghost, straight line. So the side of a building, that's a walkway. Let's create this piece here. It's a major building that's going to go straight into the camera. Right, repeating beams, right? Again, repeating shapes to give a sense of scale. Right, 2 dots connect. Right, 2 dots connect. Right, that's the way I work here. A lot of ghosting and then drawing. So practice drawing these straight lines using your elbow as the pivoting point. And a good way to do that is get a blank piece of paper, draw 2 dots about 1 inch across, maybe 2 inches across, and just trying to connect them with a straight line by first ghosting and then connecting, similar to what I'm doing here. That way you could train yourself to draw these lines pretty straight and accurate. And for small lines like that, you don't need to use a ruler. But anything long, right, this is a pretty long line here. I want to make sure it's correct. It's a major line on building. So I actually put in a ruler to make sure it's straight. Alright, same with that one. It's a pretty long line. It's a lot faster to just use a straight edge to do that. So you can see a piece already coming together in perspective. It's reading as a pretty solid beam. So it's going to continue drawing the details out. And see, look at the areas where the ink has already gone over the marker. You notice the marker underneath is already starting to disappear. Alright, marker is pretty light. Next to a black ink pen, its value doesn't stand up against it. So what you see is a lot of the line work, and the marker is going to start disappearing. Just going to detail a little more here. I think I'm cleaning my pen here, got a little bit jammed here. So, and also bring in our circle guide, right? So drawing a circle, this is a 1-point perspective, so we could get away with drawing perfect circles a little bit. It should be a little bit ellipsed, but at that distance, it should be okay to use a circle guide, right? Draw a bridge across. You could do that free-handed. Draw a couple of dots, connect them. Yeah, circle is a very difficult shape to draw, so for something like this, just a lot faster to use a circle template to do that. Some kind of neon sign. Beam going across. As far as details go, right, I do a lot of this, especially for a quick sketch like this. I do the details as I'm drawing. I think of it a little bit in my head, get an image of what I want, and just draw the detail out as I go. And later on, if this sketch is picked or going to be used, you can actually go back and set dress it further, doing detailed drawings of, for example, this beam I'm drawing. Do a separate drawing for that. Right? This drawing is more of a establishing shot to show the overall environment. Not only is it going to show the building, it's going to show some lighting, some mood, scale, right, and composition. And speaking of composition, there's a couple of things that applies to this drawing, and it should apply to most environment sketches. And that being that to really put someone into environment, you want to think about a couple of things. One of them is a foreground, the other one is your middle ground, and the other is the background. So you've got 3 layers basically to build on. Right? The thing I'm drawing right now, see this shape, this is right above the camera, and this is what I consider a foreground element. It's so close to the camera that you can't really put all your details there as far as what you're trying to establish in your painting or drawing. Most of your detail is going to go in your foreground area. For example, in this case, it's going to be the storefront. But what the foreground does, it actually brings you into the environment because it's so close to the camera, you feel like you're standing right in there. The wall is literally next to you, right? But the thing is, when you render it, most of the time you keep that in shadow or keep it out of the main focus. Your main focus is going to be your foreground element. Now your background, again, goes away as far as details go. That's going to be faded away. So when you do your background, you definitely don't want to put as much details in your background as what you put in your foreground or middle ground. Otherwise, it's going to start competing for readability. So notice, as soon as I start doing details for the foreground and background, you notice the difference in the amount of details I put in. So for now, this is sort of semi-foreground elements, right? These signs and crosswalk beams. Let's go ahead and put another neon sign in here, some kind of signage. Let's use a circle template to help us do that. A lot easier to control. Okay, you can see the drawing starting to come together. And even at this small scale, I could do quite a bit of detailing. Okay, refer to our vanishing point to make sure everything's okay. Just draw some buildings going in and out of perspective. You're in between two buildings, so it's going to come up with some random shapes here to help further explain that. Just draw some horizontal lines parallel to the horizon line. Okay, looks pretty good. Let's continue detailing. Let's draw some more. Let's move over here, take a look. And as I'm doing this, I'm referring to my thumbnail quite a bit too. I want to capture the majority of the buildings I see my thumbnail in this final drawing. So overall, the proportions of buildings are not changed. Right? If I have a big building in my thumbnail that works well in that small little drawing, I want to capture in this drawing. And also for a drawing like this, which is an establishing piece, we want to show you capture a lot of different things, right? Design, right? And mood, and just make sure overall it works. So little tiny details at this point, it doesn't really matter. You know, I could put a door there or not put a door. It doesn't really matter because the overall mood is about the entire piece. So that's why I'm not worried too much about these little details. You know, put a sign here, put on whatever I feel like it. So details like that, I'm just kind of making it up on the fly there. Some beams going across. Right, it's kind of like a drop in the middle of the street, and you can see below it. More details in the background. Remember, in the background, we can't put as much details as we just did. So we're going to draw these a little bit looser and less detail. Again, we're repeating the shape, this crosswalk that goes across these two buildings. We're repeating it into perspective, into space. Right. Something very similar in design. So you get a sense of scale with that. Let's continue on with more details. Now notice the page is spinning quite a bit, and that's a result of my way of drawing straight lines. Right, remember the connecting the dots and drawing a straight line across using your elbow as a pivoting area? That works well for me only at a certain angle to the paper, usually probably a 25-30 degree angle of the page relative to where I'm drawing. So to hit straight lines, for example a vertical line that's straight, instead of me trying to draw that, which makes it impossible since my elbow can't swing in that kind of angle, I just spin my paper around to match my straight line. And that's why, as you see me draw, the paper is spinning quite a bit all the time, right? For example, right there, right? To hit that straight line, I can only hit at that angle, so I spin the page. Let's add some further details. And keep in mind, this drawing is going to be blown up in a photocopy machine to a full 8.5 by 11. So even though this detail might seem really tiny at this point, we needed that kind of level of line work so it holds up once we blow the drawing up. Let's use the vanishing point and strike a couple more major lines. Okay, repeating the shapes. The area that's underneath this building is going to receive the most detail, because that is the selling point of this drawing, is that you're between two buildings and the shops to your left, right, and a street in front of it with people walking around. So that's the mood we're trying to capture right now. So anything, a line that's relatively long, I just use a ruler, for example, right there to hit them. Right? It's a lot easier. And because these lines are so major in controlling the perspective, I have to make sure they're correct. Let's go and add this little tiny thing here, some kind of a sign of some sort. Let's put it in there. See how the marker is helping me find some shapes? The marker that I just dabbed around helps me see a little bit what's going on in there. Let's put another sign of some sort. Use a template. Let's put that in, put some details. Okay. So stuff here is going to get quite a bit of details because it is so close to camera or point of view as to where you're standing on the street. This stuff you should be able to make out, whereas things in the backgrounds can become less detailed. Draw these in. Okay, let's check the drawing. Looks pretty good. Let's continue on with inking the details in. And also at this point, I don't worry about line weight too much. What I mean with that is, some lines later on, I'm going to beef up using a different pen, right, to make it a little thicker, to further help enhance that they're closer to the viewer with the camera. Straight lines, so let's use a ruler to hit those. Okay. Let's repeat the same shape over to the other side. And this is what really helps give it a scale. Is that you just drew a shape similar to that up close to camera, and it really feels pretty big. By repeating it there, it just shows the space in between these two shapes, the distance between them. Another major line, use a ruler to do that. Now to keep the feeling nice and loose, notice when I do my line work, a lot of the lines crisscross into each other, right? They don't end on a perfect corner, right? But that gives you the illusion of loose and sketchy and nice and quick. If you make your drawing super tight as far as the lines matching exactly, the drawing's going to feel a little dead. The sketchiness of it's going to go away. But of course that depends on what kind of drawing you're looking for. But in this case, we are doing a quick environment sketch, right? Something that about an hour to hour and a half to do. Just a marker rendering, so I'm going to keep it relatively quick. Draw more details, distance, random stuff. Now put a lot of random lines in it as well to suggest shapes, because the next step after we ink, we're going to pull some of those shapes out from those lines I put in. For now, it's going to leave it. Just a couple more details over there, here and there. So by this point, you should see the environment really taking place now, right? You can see the buildings above you, there's a street, and you're walking into the distance. And there's something going on to the left, which is all this stuff I'm about to detail up. Again, another major line, so let's use a ruler to make sure that stays in perspective. Same one with the sign here, make sure it stays in perspective. Now these are little ellipses, I'm just going to do them freehand because they're so small. And later on, I'm going to touch them up that I can just draw these freehanded for now. So just try to create a sense of mass here, a bunch of things clunked together. Sign, detail this thing out. Remember, this area is going to get a lot of attention as far as rendering and composition goes. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time and just put a lot of details in there. First, let's just check the drawing. Trying to keep the drawing pretty clean. And what I mean by that is I don't go over the same line too many times twice, right? Go over it once, and it's done. Especially for something like this, it's going to blow up later on the photocopy machines. If you noodle your line too much, all that stuff is going to show up as soon as you blow the image up. So by keeping it nice and clean, one thin line, you can get away with blowing the drawing up quite big